Hi and welcome to Permanent Excellence. And today's podcast is going to be some practical help with pigments. I've been talking a lot about pigments recently, and there's good reason for that. It's probably the question that I get asked about the most. It's also the thing that I see on forums where people just don't really understand the differences and what those differences mean to you and to your work. And everyone, again, is looking for the magic bullet, Well, I won't say there's a bad pigment out there. Well, yeah, no, I will say there's bad pigments out there. There's cheap imitation pigments. There's ones that aren't safe. There's ones that you get cheaply and they may have all sorts of ingredients mixed in. So we need to know that we're using safe ingredients. But apart from that, there is no bad pigment. There's just pigments used in the wrong way. So this is what we're going to talk about today. How do you make that transition if you've been taught with inorganic mineral pigments? I've got an itchy face today. When you've been taught with inorganic mineral pigments, how do you make that transition to organic pigments? And what should you be looking for? And what tricks should you be employing to make sure that you're going to get the best results possible? So first of all, let's discuss the difference between them. So mineral pigments, you're going to hear people say that they have larger particles. It's not actually true, it's just simplified, but they are more dense. So if they are milled to 1 micron, they're going to be the same size molecules, but one is going to be denser, so it's going to be harder to get into the skin. Whereas carbon, and we're going to talk a little bit about carbon as well, is less dense. So it gets sucked into the skin easier, because that's what is actually happening when we're putting needles into the skin. We're not pushing the pigment into the skin with our needle. We are creating suction. We're putting the needle into the skin and it is being sucked in. So something that's molecularly less dense can just fly in there. And you often hear that about people talking about carbon. It just flies into the skin. Therein lies your problem. So let's take it back a little bit more. Carbon is actually inorganic. It's an inorganic pigment. But it could be problematic to lump it in with all the other inorganics, the mineral pigments, the ones that are dense, because of how it behaves. So it actually, in the heating process, loses one of its bonds, and that makes it an inorganic pigment. And you can tell that by the CI number that starts with 77, which actually denotes that it is an inorganic compound. Does this matter? No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about the CI number. It doesn't matter that it's inorganic. You can sit there going, well, actually it's inorganic. Yeah, fine. But that could be problematic. Same with titanium dioxide. That's also inorganic, and it's one of the hardest pigments to get rid of. It doesn't laser very well. It hangs around. It becomes really visible after a while. So actually we need to know how these colorants behave individually. So carbon is actually inorganic, but it behaves like an organic, which means it gets into the skin easier, it's bolder, and it hangs around. So those are really the differences, which is why we generally say to beginners, don't use organics until you know what you're doing. Until you know that your depth is good, that your pressure is good, because if you use an organic pigment like you would an inorganic, it's going to come back to bite you. It's going to come back to bite you with oversaturated results, and results that can go a certain colour and you can't get rid of them, and you can't add to them, and you can't change them. The skin can only take so much pigment. So you need to be very, very, very careful with these compounds that fly into the skin very easily. You need to know what you're doing. It's very, very easy to oversaturate. So when are you ready? Well, we talk about these mineral pigments as being good for beginners, because generally beginners will have less experience on the skin, and so they're going to be less confident knowing that their depth is right. It's very, very easy to go too deep when you're a beginner. It's very easy to oversaturate as well when you're a beginner, because you're working and you're thinking, oh, it doesn't look right yet, doesn't look right yet, doesn't look right yet, and then suddenly, oh, too much. And with the more organic or carbon pigments, they tend to heal in better. You're going to get better retention with them. So this is why these can be popular with people. So they can be popular with people because they're going to get better retention. How many beginners have sat there saying to me, well, I remember it myself, my first 5 brows I did back, probably 4 came back with no retention. No retention at all. I say this to my students in VI PMU now, and I'm like, this is not something that didn't happen to me. You know, it's not like I can't sit there and remember when this exactly happened to me. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Why is it not working? Well, we have to know that we're getting into the right part of the dermis, the papillary layer of the dermis. That's where our pigment is going to look its best. You know, that's the correct layer. If we go too deep, you can get what we call blowouts, where the pigment can leach under the skin and you get a shadow on your work, and you can see that. Really, really easy to do it on this bit here. Top of the arch is really thin, and also the tail. The skin there is really thin, so it's really easy to get too deep there. So beginners need to be well practiced. You need to have a lot of time on skin, or you need to have learnt properly with organics. There's a lot of people out there teaching people with organics who are teaching them properly. There is no good and bad, but this is the reason why you'll often see in these groups people saying, if you're a beginner, don't use these. The reason being is if you mess it up, it's there forever. It's there forever. There is no semi-permanent on this. There's no semi-permanent anyway. It's not a thing. It's either not gone in properly and it sloughs off over time, which happens more with the mineral pigments because of the molecular density of them, or it's permanent and it's just there. So what we don't want is these brows that are going sort of asphalt grey over a couple of years, and then you're just left with them thinking, well, what do we do with them? And laser then is your only option. This podcast is brought to you by VI PMU, my very own mentorship, where we do focus on skills. We want to get you to be the best artist you can be, but we also help you with your marketing and how to convert people into actual paying clients. It also doesn't cost $10,000, so if you want help, click the link below. So when would we use these stronger pigments, and when are you ready? Or what should you be looking out for? So if you're well experienced on skin and you know that you're light-handed, if you are also getting clients that come back with no retention, then you may need something stronger. I find that minerals don't work perfectly well for everyone. They just don't. I use a lot of mineral pigments. I really like them. I really like how soft they are, how forgiving they are. I also like the long-term heals on my minerals. I love the fact that I get clients coming back in. Let me think of when it was that I last worked, 2 days ago. And two of my clients came back and said, I just want you to do exactly what you did 2 years ago, because it's healed really beautifully, it's faded really beautifully, I don't want to go any darker. So it means that I'm getting it right and that my clients are happy with it. But there are going to be clients that don't retain it that well, because if they've got more difficult skin, it can be harder to get the right amount of colorant into that papillary layer with something that is dense, like a mineral pigment. It also requires a lot more work. You have to work harder to get it to show up in the skin. So what happens for me when I get someone that comes back for their second session, their touch up, and there's really poor retention, and I can see there's really poor retention. It's not that, oh, I'll just go a bit darker, or I'll just try a different needle. It isn't the pigment for them. Then I'm going to try and go for something stronger. So it's finding what matches that client and what matches their skin. So I'll usually go for a hybrid or something organic. So I don't think there's any good or bad pigments. There's the correct pigment for the correct client for whatever outcome they need. All my clients generally come to me for natural results. If you look at my work, it's not those really snatched outline Insta brows that look like makeup. That's not my kind of client. My client generally will want natural results that will fade. That's what if I say to them, I can have, what is the outcome that they want? If they want something that's going to last for 5 years, yeah, I can do that. Are you going to be happy with that turning grey at the end of 5 years? No. Right, well then that's not what you want, because that's generally what's going to happen. Or you want something that does fade eventually, then I'll probably go for something mineral. Or are you wanting a nice mixture of the two, something that lasts a decent while and doesn't fade a weird colour, and that you feel like you've got your money's worth, but it isn't going to lead to really serious removal? Then I'm going to try and find the correct solution for that person within the pigment. So the next thing I would do is go up to a hybrid, which is going to have some, it's usually a mineral pigment with some carbon. Now, the hybrid situation can be hard to read because is it an organic leaning one or is it an inorganic leaning one? If it's mostly minerals with a little bit of carbon, it's not going to be that much different. Whereas if it's all carbon with one mineral, then, you know, it's going to be behaving a lot more differently and it's going to be a lot stronger. So if I want to then go up to organics, remember carbon is an inorganic, but for purposes of this podcast, we're going to be referring to it as an organic because it behaves like one. Then I'm going to have to be super careful. So how do I work differently if I'm going to be working with those less dense molecules, with the brighter, more durable pigments? The first thing I'm going to be is very, very light-handed. So if you're used to working with things like Biotech or LI Aqua, those are two sort of really well-known brands. If you work the same with them as you did for something like, say, Skills that I use, which is really highly pigmented, organic pigments, then you're going to get a very different result. You're going to get oversaturated brows and really unhappy clients. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is make a very, very conscious effort to be light-handed. You're also going to have to make your work really airy. So lots of space between pixels, maybe turning your machine down to make sure that the work is more spaced out, that the pixels are more spaced out, because you do not want to oversaturate. Remember, some of these pigments have like 95% retention. That means what you put in is going to heal in. So there's no wiggle room. So you need to put plenty of space in there as well. Also, you need to make sure that your depth is okay, because if you go too deep with carbon, it will look grey or blue. That's just what happens. So you need to know that you're working at a really light pressure. So one way to test that is to put a latex or nitrile glove on your hand and gently use your machine over the top of it with a needle in, no pigment though, you don't want to actually tattoo it into your hand. And you want to test that, and it should be piercing the glove, but not your skin. So it shouldn't be painful on your skin. You should be able to feel it, but it should feel like the needle is brushing you. It's not at all painful. If you're going any deeper than that, it's too deep. It's too deep for those pigments. So that's a really good test to test your depth. And practice on latex. Always practicing. Okay? So you've got your depth down. You've got your you've got your speed down as well. So what else? You need to stop before you think you've finished. That's going to be my ultimate piece of advice for using these stronger pigments. You need to stop before you've finished. So I think it was Biotech was saying with their mineral pigments that you need to be going over the work several times to make sure that it's well saturated. Otherwise, you're going to get clients coming back that are unhappy with their healed results. So with the stronger pigments, back off before you think you've done, because what will happen is if you saturate like an inorganic, you're going to do one brow, go to the next brow, and you're going to be working away, and then you're going to go and look back at your first brow and it's going to shock the hell out of you, and you're going to like, oh my God, remember that's probably going to heal in. With inorganics, I think that a lot of the time when the work is finished, it does look looking a little oversaturated and a little bit kind of waxy almost. Full, it looks full. And when you get these clients coming back, a lot of it will have gone. A lot of that will not have healed in. So it's a safety blanket. And so a lot of clients on the day, you'll be saying, I know they look strong now and they're going to look even stronger tomorrow, but trust me, they're going to chill out so much and you're going to come back with really light, beautiful brows. And they do. If you overdo it with the carbon, forget it, that's what's staying in, and they're going to come back with these dense grey brows. So I would say stop before you think you've finished. Maximum 2 passes, and I know that's really hard to measure because what is a pass? Is it actually going over the skin once, or is it saturating and then going over and starting again? But just leave plenty of air, plenty of gaps in it, and stop before you think you're finished, because the majority of that, if it's a strong, highly concentrated organic pigment, is going to heal in. Cockerels. Real life. I'm surrounded by cockerels and geese. So that would be my advice for that. Because what is the outcome if you oversaturate? Cockerels. It's going to be laser. It's going to be laser. And the problem is some of these really strong pigments, they have a lot of carbon. They also may have titanium as well. So you've got that really strong black that's going to heal grey, and you've got that really opaque white, because titanium is incredibly reflective. It's what's used in sun cream to reflect the sunlight. And that's what gives us opacity in lips, is when they've got high titanium dioxide content. But if you have that in brows, then we've got a problem, because laser is brilliant at getting rid of carbon. Because of that less dense molecule, just smashes it to bits. Really, you can get rid of a lot of carbon in one session of laser. So quite easy to remove with a laser, but titanium is not. Titanium has a tendency to look yellow, or it can sometimes look kind of grey and become very, very obvious. So when I say be careful, these are the outcomes if you're not. This is the outcome. The laser is going to be your only option of getting rid of them. Saline, take you forever to try and lift those brows out with saline. And most people who come to you for brows aren't coming for an issue 2 years down the road, of having to have them blasted out with a laser. They're wanting something that is generally going to fade gradually and look all right, not be that difficult to deal with. So this is the outcome if you get it wrong. So something that's really, really, really highly pigmented and you get it wrong is going to cause you a problem. So let's talk about migration. So with that very less dense of a very molecularly less dense carbon pigment, it can get sucked very easily into the skin, and it means it can just kind of travel all around, which means that it can migrate. So it's not that the particles are smaller, it's that it can just easily move around because it's so light. So hair strokes, microblading, I do not recommend microblading with a carbon-based pigment for two reasons. Carbon pigments look cool. Microblading by its very nature, because it's in a tightly packed space and often is put in a little deeper, whether you mean to or not, than nano strokes, that can have a tendency to look cool anyway. So you put a cool pigment in a cool technique, it's going to heal cool, and a lot of the time it's going to blur out as well. Those little carbon molecules are going to spread out, and it's going to look migrated and messy very quickly. So you may find that if you're microblading with a carbon pigment, you'll see people in a couple of years and it's just all blurred into one grey block. Whereas I'm seeing people with hair strokes that I've put in years ago, and I still see them, and even though they've faded, they're really crisp, because it's much harder for that to move around. So I would suggest that you should be doing hair strokes with hybrids or inorganics, mineral pigments. You're just going to get a better long-term result for that if your client really wants to keep hold of hair strokes. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're going to do one and then you're onto a powder brow if you're not onto laser. So for the good of your clients long-term, and we should always be thinking of the good of our clients long-term, then I would say that minerals and hybrids are better for microblading. With regards an ombre, I think it's down to how the client is going to heal. Remember that microblading isn't suitable for most people anyway, maybe 40% of people. So you're going to be doing ombres on more people than you're going to be doing hair strokes on. But an ombre, I would be led by the client and their results. So if you don't get good results with a mineral or a hybrid pigment, or your clients generally are unhappy with how long the mineral pigments are lasting, then you may want to move to something that's easier to put in and is going to give them brighter, long-lasting results. So remember that carbon isn't bad. It's not bad, it's just strong. Well, it's got an ability to get into the skin very easily and move around. So you need to treat it with kid gloves, you need to treat it with respect. So are there any other differences that you need to think of if you are moving from inorganic to organic? We need to talk about modification. Now, modification is an insurance policy against colour shifts. It's putting things in to ensure that we don't have weird healed results. And some people's skin, due to melanin or whether it's aged badly, you know, whether it's sun damaged, they'll have more tendency to need modification. I don't modify with a lot of my mineral pigments. I just don't need to. And I think this is where some pigment lines got a bad rep, was because they were being told to modify 20%, put 20% grey vanish or ungrey in your pigment. And these colorants were so strong that what's happening is your pigment was fading, you're just being left with all that orange, and there were all these orange brows walking around. I don't modify my minerals that much. I may do on someone who's really higher up the Fitzpatrick scale, so someone who's got really highly melanated skin, I may modify a little bit more. They might need some more warmth in there because they have a tendency to heal really cool. Or if it's really sun damaged skin, that generally pulls quite grey, so I might modify a little bit. But other than that, I just don't think you need to. I have mineral pigments coming back to me, healed, faded, aged, and they don't shift. They don't shift the warm colours. They just don't. Have I seen it? Yeah, I've seen it now and then. But consistently, my clients come back in and it's just faded brown. It's faded, but it's faded brown, which means that they haven't gone through periods of going, oh my God, what's going on with my eyebrows? In the past, yeah, I would see it with some pigment lines, but with the ones I use, generally I just don't see it. I don't see those colour shifts. So I don't think that we need to modify as much as people are saying, particularly for minerals. Just be careful. These are really powerful compounds. We don't need to be whacking 10% in. And if you do modify, we're talking a drop, not like 20%. I mean, that's just crazy amounts of colour. However, if you've got carbon in there and a lot of it, you need to modify. And you may need to modify with everyone. Some of the pigments that I use require, with some of the colours, 50% modification. So you might think that we're shifting it to a warmer colour. Yeah, we are, but also what are we doing with that? We're also just like reducing the amount of carbon black in there. By putting a load of orange in your pigments, let's just say you put 50% in, that's 50% less black. So I think that organic pigments should look warm. Your brows should look warm. Your client should go away thinking, whew, these are a little bit orangey, aren't they? Cool. They're not going to heal like that. They're going to heal a really nice shade of brown. And that's what I find. So modification is something that you're going to have to learn if you want to take that shift from inorganic to organic. Carbon, it's still an inorganic. 77 CI number. But you are going to have to get used to modifying and knowing when to modify. And really, that warmth should be there. Some brands are already pre-modified, but is it enough for the client that you're using? I'd rather be in control of that myself, because I'd rather know the strength of the pigment, the ingredients of the pigment, and be in charge of that myself and modifying it, rather than letting someone else just say it's modified for everyone, because, you know, my skin is not going to be the same as the next person's skin. But yeah, you need to balance out that, or otherwise what you're going to get is grey or blue brows quicker. So it's to balance that out. But it, you know, essentially we're diluting the amount of carbon in it. And carbon's a really great ingredient for getting us strong, powerful pigments that last. It's not a bad thing. It's just a bad thing if it's used incorrectly. And there's a lot of that about. And there's a lot of people scared. And there is a big backlash at the moment. A few years ago, it was all minerals. And then there was this real big change to organic pigments. And everyone was thinking, this is brilliant. They just go in the skin. They're really bright and the clients are happy. And then 2-3 years later, big blocks of grey and a lot of laser work. And now there's this swing back to minerals. You know, like, oh, carbons are all bad. And I honestly think you just need to know your ingredients, to know how they behave, know your client's skin type, get to know things on an ingredient level so that you have the knowledge and then the power that when your clients aren't healing well with minerals, to know how to use something stronger. All these things are there for you to use. This is my message running through everything. All these things are there for you to use, and they all have a place. You just need to know how to use them properly. So if you're having people with retention issues, and it's not everyone, because if it's everyone, then it's you. There's something wrong with your technique if everyone's coming back. But if you get a client that just isn't retaining, you need to be able to give them what they want. So actually on one day I remember an older client who I used a mineral pigment diluted 50%. Dilution is a topic for another day. Not a lot of people doing dilution. It's really, really good technique to learn. It's your friend. So I did a really sort of, low colorant based line mineral pigment, and I diluted it 50%. And those brows were brilliant. They healed really, really well. Didn't need hardly any work at the touch-up. She grabbed onto them because she's got thin skin. So if I put stuff in there, it ain't coming out. So with people like that, I'll take it easy. And the next client was someone that I'd seen before, and I knew full well that we'd struggled with her retention. And she had an immune disorder, and a lot of the time with immune disorders, your immune system is working too hard, and it will just see the pigment as a foreign object and attack it, and that's what happened. So her retention was pretty poor. It took us 3 sessions to get a good results, and this was a couple of years later. And so I'm not going to start at a mineral pigment again. So I went straight for a highly concentrated organic pigment, and she got great results. Now, having that knowledge of both of those clients' skin, their biology, but also of all the tools in my arsenal, that meant that I knew exactly what to do with both of them and got great results, great retention on both those clients who had very, very, very different needs. So it's understanding what's inside them, how they're going to react, and who to use it on is going to be your best bet to mean that you have the whole world of pigments open up to you. There's no good and bad. It's just that these trends have kind of stopped us trusting ourselves because we're looking for this one size fits all, and there really isn't. So get to know your pigments, get to know what's in them, get to know how they behave and how to use them, and you're going to be able to give everyone fantastic results and also know how they're going to age. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that helped, and I'll see you soon.